you check the children?
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes that is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Bienvenidos, Fright fans, and welcome to the Horror Show. I am Jaime and Fuego, and so very stoked to be bringing you a little bit of solo coverage from Fantastic Fest 2025. It is taking place in person in Austin, but myself, Cecil, obviously the entire gang, pretty much, Davey, Robert, everybody has been getting the chance to jump on some of these reviews, but this is one of the few that I actually took in solo. And we are very happy to have had the opportunity to cover this virtually here in the deadly desert of Arizona. But this is a film entitled Theater is Dead. So I didn't know what to expect going into this because I'm trying to remember if there was a teaser that I actually got the chance to see so that I could get a vibe for tone. The synopsis, which is on the Fantastic website, made many a Buffy reference for whatever reason, including some shout-outs to Pedro Pascal, but in any event, this is coming at us from co-writer and director Catherine Dudas. I know I'm probably butchering the pronunciation there, Catherine. Apologies if you happen to be watching this review. But, so we always here on the Horror Show like to go through the various facets, overall thoughts, acting, story, production value, music, so on and so forth. And so overall thoughts, mixed bag for me, and that's not because of the fact that I'm some rocker dude and, this just being theater-centric wasn't my jam, because back in high school when I was nerded out, man, I wasn't a part of the theater troupe, but I was friends with a lot of those kids, and so I have an appreciation for things like are referenced in this movie, everything from Les Mis to Cats to, I'm actually a apologist for the silliness of that awful Cats movie because of the fact that I like the music so very much in a lot of it. And so it was not for a lack of understanding or appreciation or for it being too inside baseball for me or whatever, but so that's not to say that the film is not without its merits, but just the story, which I don't really... It's so tough with this one because about an hour in, without getting into any spoilery specificity, that's when the film kind of turns into what you would kind of expect at a genre festival. Because up until that point, it's very much just what you would kind of think trying to be a novice, a newcomer getting into acting would be. We have this lead lady. Well, I'll get into that in a moment, with story and all of that jazz. But overall thoughts there. From a production standpoint and from a directorial standpoint, I was immensely impressed with this, especially with a few stylistic decisions that are made between, I guess, the real world and then the world of the play, without actually getting into, too many details. And although I didn't really care much for the performance of the lead, I thought everybody else in the film was especially solid. I mean, I think Jaden was my favorite character. He was so great. Reminded me of a few specific friends of mine, but I'll get into that. So the story, it kind of tonally just can't figure itself out. It veers back and forth between, goofy and then supremely serious, and for my money, at least, in my personal opinion of the subjectivity of art, didn't really blend the tones. They felt very, disparate and just didn't really blend to the degree that I was hoping to. But that's not to say that the film wasn't without moments of very amusing humor, good performances from some of the supporting cast, and then just stylistic decisions that I thought were borderline brilliant, as far as saying that I haven't seen a film that immediately comes to mind. I mean, maybe The Fall is one where, you're telling a story and then it immediately jumps into the world of that story. I thought those were some very interesting decisions, but not all of the humor landed for me, and unfortunately, the performance of the lead just didn't work for me, without getting into too many specifics. But so story-wise, though, we have a very auteur stage director in Seattle, played by Shane West, and so he has lots of reverence, a very prestigious resume, and so he is just getting done with a run that essentially launched the lead's career into the stratosphere. She had gone on to do feature film and you know, things of that nature, and so left the stage to, as often happens, you know, with a lot of thespians, that is the next step in the process. You know, you hone your skills, or at least this is the way that it used to be. Maybe not as much now, at least in America, but most definitely over in like Britain and stuff, is where you hone your skills on the stage so that you can be flawless on screen. Unfortunately, here in America, that's not always the case, because we have people who line as opposed to having really sharpened the tools in their proverbial belt, you know, before they actually get in front of a camera. But so Shane West's character has his next production about to start, and his next production has open casting, including for those who have no experience whatsoever, which is a little odd for somebody of his esteem, but hey, because movie or because story, you know, I'm not here to spoil anything. But yeah, so our lead girl in this, so she has no experience, and she is an engineer student. But she has kind of a side thing that she is doing when she is not in school, where she is developing menstrual cups with like this friend of hers, and it is really trying to play the stuff for laughs of them going through all these different prototypes and stuff. And so the film starts out really lighthearted, really goofy, but just the writing of the interplay between her and this other character, I guess this might be a little more into acting and whatnot, but a lot of the humorous stuff between, like, I could tell that they thought that this gag, which has a very, 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 very long-winded payoff near the end of the film, actually. So there is a purpose to the weirdness of this aspect of the story, but I didn't find it funny at all. And it's actually, it plays a pretty significant part as, you know, we get to the third act and whatever. But yeah, so that bit is the emphasis of just kind of the goofy but not necessarily landing, at least humorly for me, sort of stuff. And so what she's feeling a little lost, and you know, like not quite as into the project with him, and yet it ties in with her schoolwork too, which is even crazier. And so she had a father who was an actor, and her father had passed away, unfortunately, and so he's no longer around. She has a very oddly written dynamic with her mother that I know was trying to be quirky and stuff, but just the writing of the dialogue, you know, just unless they were ad-libbing, you know, some of this stuff just did not work for me particularly. But so her mother goes out of town and is visiting with like family or whatnot, and so and the interim of her mother's absence, she decides to go and audition for the aforementioned play that Shane West's character is directing. She gets a little bit of pushback from certain people, most notably Shane West's Nepo daughter, which there is a very funny joke that Shane West actually has. One of the few jokes that really landed with me, besides just anything Jaden, because Jaden was an endearing sweetheart in this movie. But yeah, Shane West has a very funny joke about, you know, his daughter and nepotism. But she's like the entitled goth performer. She's acting in a few indies and whatever, and she ends up getting paired with our lead character, and she's borderline like hazing her because her father has specifically chosen this, you know, no name, no experience person to join the production, and so there's some pushback there, and yet things proceed. She's trying to hone her skills. She's not really doing the best of jobs. But then in the second act is where the film takes, without spoiling stuff once again, a pretty distinctive turn into, dare I say, the psychedelic. And this is where the film started to actually work for me, where it was less relying on the awkward humor of our lead, which wasn't really working as much for me, wasn't really landing, because everybody else I thought was quite funny. And yet, that's where the film, from that stylistic angle that I was mentioning, takes some very big, bold, you know, just choices and ambitious decisions, and that's where, and I'll get into it in the production value and the effects and stuff, that's where the film got a lot more interesting, because of the fact that you could tell she was, like, whether it's the stress of her trying to hone her skills and live up to being the lead, because she's not only coming in with no experience, she's been cast as the lead. So, you know, that's why there's some pushback from Shane West's daughter, but there's also just even a little confusion from a few other cast members, including one girl who is very jealous of the fawning attention that Shane West is giving this brand new girl, as opposed to, you know, her, who is like Juilliard trained and all this other stuff. So And then the third act is where we kind of veer from being just a play and, you know, some of the ups and downs of the difficulties of that sort of production into the more genre-centric, you know, elements. Although they are, like, kind of teased and eased into in the second act when you start embodying the play as far as, like, going with these characters. And once again, I have to walk on eggshells here. So, you know, the writing of the humor was still my biggest issue, but and the story, once you finally get some of these reveals as to the nature of the proceedings, what's going on and whatever, that's where it starts to feel a little bit derivative, unfortunately. And then also the menstrual cup, you know, just weird subplot, and the payoff of that just didn't really, I don't know, for me, I just didn't find it funny. But once again, art is subjective. You know, some people hate cats, you know, some people are dog people, and I don't, that's a terrible joke. But on to the acting. I just didn't care for the lead. I didn't. She was playing it in an essence where she's trying to be kind of, you know, all starry-eyed. You know, there is one moment that is amusingly done where she first gets behind the bright lights and the music starts playing, and then it's like screeched to a halt. It's like, oh, hey, you can't get lost in those and you have to really go to it. But like the humorous moments with her, whether it was interactions with the guy that she's doing the project with, or even later as her relationship is developing with Shane West as the director, and then when things start to get a little bit more serious with her, and there's a couple heavier scenes as we get later into the movie. I guess maybe her performance was a little bit more on point for me in those, and also where she's doing accents in this world of the play. I guess that was a little bit better for me, where it was more on the dramatic side as opposed to the comedic side. But, you know, I'm not here to like rack her over the coals, because I want to say pretty much everybody else in this movie I thought was very funny. I've mentioned Jaden countless times, so he is like a big, goofy, lovable gay, and I just loved him so much, man. He reminded me of my friend Benita, that is a big, you know, aficionado of stage, and he does, you know, children's productions here in the deadly desert of Arizona. So he reminded me so much of my friend Benita, and I just loved him to pieces. And then Shane West, actually, as this, you know, creative but stoic, but also like not necessarily averse to a little bit of cavorting with his actresses and whatnot. I mean, I thought he was good. I can't remember the last thing I saw him, and it was, I mean, back in the late 90s, early aughts, I know he was like some little heartthrobby dude. I want to say like maybe the Mandy Moore movie, the one that was super sad and based on a book. But yeah, I mean, he was good in this role now that he's aged up and everything, and he's a dad with an angsty, like, you know, early 20-something. And I thought her performance was actually pretty good as well. She gets the venom across, but yet also there is a well-roundedness to her performance, and the fact that you can tell why she would be clashing with her father. You can understand why she would be just, you know, some pushback on this girl who comes out of nowhere and has been cast in the lead. And she even, I believe if I recall, at one point mentions to her father, like, I could do this, I could be the lead, and so on and so forth. But long story short, you kind of find out why as some of the lore is revealed. And, you know, I forgot to mention that in the story stuff, and I have to, without getting into detail, at least mention that there is some world building and some lore in this that I felt was like ham-fisted as fuck, and just kind of came out of nowhere, and in some ways was unnecessary. But it was kind of, it goes with the fact that I feel like this film is like tonally schizophrenic in a lot of ways and can't figure out what type of movie it wants to be. Like, blending of horror and comedy is really tough because it is a juggling act, and a lot of the time it can feel just very, I don't know, very just imbalanced and a little bit just improperly blended. And that's why it's not easy to make a horror comedy. It really is not. I mean, that's why a lot of the time people just stick to one or the other, as opposed to, because when you blend them poorly, and that's not to say that this did throughout, but because I liked when it was veering into that more like psychedelic, strange sort of stuff. And then there's most notably this scene where our lead and Jaden get all drunk, and then she goes into this like otherworldly sort of situation. So I guess that's really a good segue into the production value and the effects of this movie, because I've praised it significantly throughout, and I will continue to. This is a terrific looking movie. The cinematography, because we get some of the great white Northwest. I'm assuming, despite claiming it takes place in Seattle, that this was filmed up in Canada. So when we do get some of the exteriors of this small, it's supposed to be an island, like just off of Seattle. So an island that I guess is part of the city of Seattle, but it's this small little suburban community that you have to like take a boat on and off to actually get to the mainland of Seattle and whatever, or so I surmise, because they mention that it's in Seattle. But yeah, man, so from the cinematography to just the production values in general, this is a very slick, very glossy, it looks like studio Hollywood quality, and even though I'm assuming that this was made independently outside of the studio system. So it's a great looking movie, and the scenes where you are essentially, well, I guess it's a conceit that's not really much of a spoiler for me to mention, but there are, it starts to really like sink its claws in like as we're beginning the second act and veering into that, as the play is really progressing, because our lead, essentially, to get herself in the zone, she starts like envisioning herself in the play. And so she'll be on stage and she'll be going through lines, with the other gentleman who's playing her husband in it. And so it immediately like flips to this big, gorgeous, like almost Victorian sort of setting, completely different costuming. Like you are seeing the play transpiring. I'm trying to remember if they had a scene like this in, I don't think it was Misery. In any event, it's inconsequential, but it was a really cool idea. And if poorly executed, it may seem hokey and goofy, and it was not in this case. It was a very cool decision by the director, Catherine, and her production team. And so, yeah, I mean, great looking in that regard. The kind of psychedelic drunken freak out that I mentioned, which is about halfway through the movie, where our lead gets drunk with Jaden, I thought that was a great scene. And, I mean, even as we get into like the back half of the movie, it's utilized even more so, and every single time they kind of do that little flip, I thought it was brilliantly done, very well executed. And yeah, I mean, aside from that, you don't really get like tons of gore, because it takes like its sweet ass time to actually get to be, although there is something very funny with like a bit falling from the catwalk, which gets a little gruesome. That's later in the movie, but still, so not much as far as like practical effects or anything, but I gotta praise the costuming, where you jump into the world of the play, which I thought was really cool. And then just, I don't know, the sheer look of the film was really, really great. And one of my favorite scenes is where our lead and the daughter of Shane West, the Nepo child who has all the pushback, they have a little exchange, which is one of my favorite scenes in the film, where there is a character revealing something to the other character. There's an altercation that transpires after that. It's really creepy. And then there's also another extended sequence, which I guess is the most horror that we get in this entire movie. And it deals with the girl who went to Juilliard and her getting to really flex it. It's almost like a horror movie within a dramatic comedy sort of situation. So that's also where the tones just didn't feel like they blended very well, because a lot of these changes just felt very abrupt, as opposed to, I guess, earned in some ways. But that doesn't mean that when we got to those sequences that they weren't very well orchestrated, produced, and executed. So, and then also something that happens as the film is wrapping up, where we see it has to deal with a lot of exposition from a certain character, but it's a character explaining things, some backstory, as there is some people just kind of acting it out on stage, as this person is kind of giving this, just kind of history, so to speak. And I thought that sequence near the end of the movie was also very well done. So, and also musically, I mean, the score is, it's eclectic. That's the best way I can put it, because it goes from having like the sweeping, stringy, like sort of accompaniment you would have like in a 20s or 30s sort of film production or stage production of some sort, and there's some whimsy to it and everything. It's like I'm joining the show and all this other stuff, but then the main theme, and it also plays during the end credits, is like this kind of dirgy, synthy, more moody. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. And then there's also like silly little punk rock interlude during a shopping sequence, and yet that's the thing. It ping-pongs tonally like all over the place a lot of the time, and I guess that's why, unfortunately, this movie is a mixed bag for me as I'm just kind of wrapping things up here, because there was so much creativity and so many interesting things going on, but yet I had issues with the scripting. Not all of the humor landed with me, but that's not to say that I wasn't immensely impressed with a lot of other aspects of this, most notably the humor and the performances of the supporting cast, and just the production value, and just the way that they so creatively tried to present various facets of this story on screen. However, even if I found some of the third act reveals to be a little like yawn-inducing and ham-fisted. So overall, Theater is Dead was an interesting experience, because it was like, I wasn't liking it at all, and then it was winning me over, and then I wasn't so sure about it. And so at the end of the day, especially if you're a theater kid, whether younger or all grossed up, I feel like that contingent will most definitely find a lot more in this than certain other genre fans will. But I would say that there is enough merit within the proceedings here to definitely give it a shot, especially if the conceit of, especially from the visual standpoint that I mentioned, and the humor may work a lot better for you. So, guys, Theater is Dead. If I have struck any chords with you, so to speak, if this has kind of tickled your proverbial theatrical fancy, I would say definitely keep it on your radar, because this is going to hit, either a Screenbox or a Shudder or something like that. It most definitely has just that gloss and that sheen. And I was expecting like a full-blown musical, like a Stage Fright or something, or maybe Once More with Feeling, like the Buffy episode. And I didn't get that. And I was kind of, I like that sort of stuff. So that's not to say that those preconceptions had any sort of hindrance to my overall feelings on it, though. So yeah, that's my thoughts, everybody, from Fantastic Fest 2025 on Theater is Dead. So I extend the grande gracias to obviously everybody at Brad and the people at the Fantastic Fest who have given all of us the opportunity to do virtual press. I know thus far, as of this recording, Cecil has a review of Coyotes up that he did with Robert the Wolfman. There are also going to be reviews coming of a lot of stuff. I mean, Meat Kills, Dysphoria, 13 Days till summer, I think it was. And I don't know. There's a lot of stuff that is still left to be covered over the course of the festival, which runs through September 25th. This review will not be going up until after the embargo lifts, which is September 23rd. So, yeah, guys, if you're at Fantastic and had the chance to check this out, or if you caught it at a different festival, because I think it has played elsewhere before this, although I'm not 100%, but leave your thoughts in the comments below. Was I being too cruel to this film? Was I, kind of right on point, or do you think I was being a little too nice with my, balance of praise for various other aspects of it beyond some of the humor and performances that did not land for me? So I extend the grande gracias up in Jaime and Fuego. You can find moi on all social media sectors, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Tiki-Talkies, all the silliness, but yeah, like, share, subscribe. Y'all know the drill. And also a big thanks to our patrons as well. We appreciate y'all. So, yeah, guys, I guess until the next Fantastic Fest. There's so many fests out there, man. Until the next bit of Fantastic Fest coverage. It takes place live in Austin, but we're happy to be covering it here in Arizona. Stay scared, and yeah, see you then.